All right.
Pleasure to follow you.
This is good.
Didn't ever think I would have Michael Jackson opening for me.
I knew that would happen one day.
I saw someone with a hat and gloves, and they were the smartest person in the room. Now they left. So let me introduce you to the new smartest person in the room, Dave Oksman. He actually did just fly in from Samsonite.
Living the brand, just flying in exactly before hopping in a taxi, and here we are.
Right. So he's diving right in, so let's dive right in. We are at our first conference since COVID for a lot of us. So the past 2 years, we haven't had these conversations, especially not in person. And you have an interesting story because you started at Samsonite before we even knew that COVID-19 was going to create the massive changes in not only our industry, but yours in particular. So take me back to that moment when you signed that offer, you started on your first day, and then the journey since then.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know if anyone wants to go back to 2020, but for a minute I will here. Yeah, I actually accepted the role as head of marketing and e-commerce March 10th, 2020. So my timing was really, really bad or really, really good. And, it was a challenging time, obviously. The world shifted. Travel literally came to a stop. But in that time, change, transformation happens, the consumer shifts their behaviors, and the past 2 years have actually been extremely valuable for us as a brand and as a team in terms of really understanding what travel means to people's lives. Because if you've been looking at your four walls for the past 24 months, I think there's a real recognition of how important movement is in your life and how it creates connection and really makes us all a little bit better and more open to the world around us. So it was an absolutely challenging time. We started by obviously making sure our people were okay. As travel stopped, you just want to reinforce the culture piece. So it was really important for us to kind of reinforce how are we going to work? Are people feeling safe? Where is everyone? From there, we really shifted our focus to helping. Lending a hand where we could. We were giving bags away to nurses and people who are on the front lines, just making sure that we were being part of the solution. And then for consumers who really weren't going to be traveling, we were trying to think about, well, how can Samsonite and luggage and bags and backpacks play a part of their lives? And for us, we were doing things like how to use it as gym equipment, like literally like having people work out with their bags and finding unique ways to just, again, engage with a fact that we were doing something that had never been done before in the world. And then after that, trends started to shift. The world opened up. There was more like localized road trips happening. And we can get into it, but revenge travel and lots of other big topics that have sort of shifted the way people move. So again, it's really just about being authentic and ultimately understanding what's on consumers' minds and what's on your people's minds, and just going with it despite unheard of circumstances, for sure.
So I want to dive into that concept of revenge travel, but really in how you uncover that, right? We all know just from how we all operated, the trends that we followed in our own lives in terms of, restrictions are lifting, I want to get back out there, taking my first flight since COVID. But as a business, you had obviously your sales to think about how do we take advantage of those things, but also I assume some sort of level of data and insights that you could even look and get ahead of some of these trends that we were just experiencing as folks trapped in our house trying to get out, seeing what our friends were doing, etc.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, we weren't just faced with, obviously, like, what are we going to do from a direct-to-consumer perspective, but our biggest customers are some of the biggest brands in the world, places like Amazon and Macy's and Kohl's, these amazing retailers, and they were looking for confidence. They were looking for, like, what's going to happen and what is happening in the space. So as the market leader, it was really important for us to have the data to reinforce where there were pockets of opportunity. So as an example, once we saw localized road trips happening in the summer of 20, we really pivoted, and it was small. It was backpacks. We shot a campaign to show people moving in a more sort of road trip lifestyle. And on top of that, we were partnering on the data side to figure out what was the sentiment. And slowly you saw improved sentiment in terms of people's mentality towards even localized movement before it got back to sort of domestic air travel, et cetera. So, and even now, we're constantly looking at TSA data every single day and tracking that trend, trying to figure out for us, it's international travel, when is that coming back, as well as business travel. So it's actually, we're in an amazing place when you think about it. It's 2022, and really international travel is still extremely, extremely depleted versus historical state, but so much domestic leisure travel is happening that really, we're seeing really strong success, especially in the digital side, because think about it, there were so many people who weren't really feeling comfortable purchasing online back in 2020 that were forced to buy groceries, to buy, just things that they needed to live. And I think that actually really opened up the consumer behavior, and now digital penetration probably sped up about 10 years in 3 months in 2020. So it's been a wild ride, and I think data is super critical to making sure that you really understand what the consumer's thinking and where they might be heading.
Part of your role is e-commerce and driving that. I know maybe before you started, you maybe had a thought about how you would attack that and the strategy that you would take. But with that shift in in folks becoming more comfortable buying something like luggage online, and just all of the things we know about what we all personally went through with COVID, how did your strategy change as you took on the role and as the world changed, and kind of where are you at now in the trajectory of emphasizing e-commerce as a core part of Samsonite's strategy?
Yeah, so obviously from the beginning, for me, one of the reasons I came to Samsonite, it's a 111-year-old brand. It's this amazing heritage brand that has significant market share, market leader. But really, what it was missing in terms of really bringing the brand to the next level was this sort of like authentic storytelling that was at the heart of where it came from and where it's going. I think everyone knows it's a great product, but they don't necessarily know about our sustainability focus and some of these things like that. So when I came in, because travel basically stopped for a short time, it really enabled us to elevate the brands, to focus on understanding our positioning, our purpose, and ultimately understanding how that consumer mindset was going to shift on the travel side. So my focus was really there initially. And now, as e-commerce is surging, and our key accounts as well as our direct-to-consumer business is seeing significant increases in digital penetration, and the retail brick-and-mortar space is transforming along with it, it really comes down to digital shelf and how do you create enhanced content that enables the consumer to buy wherever they want to buy seamlessly and effectively in a way that ultimately lives up to the consumer's expectations. Because before, luggage is something you really want to experience it. Is it heavy? Is it light? Seeing all the benefits, the functionality is not as easily transferable to a digital environment. So really elevating our enhanced content structure, infrastructure, and building experiences that don't just reinforce the lifestyle side, but the functional side has been a big focus for us.
You mentioned some of your retail partners and how you get your products into the hands of consumers. Can you talk a little bit about how those relationships evolved and maybe got stronger through COVID and through the massive changes that happened to your business? Maybe even an example of how a partner really showed up for you and really has become a stronger part of your core strategy and how you continue to expand with e-commerce, obviously, but just even transformed your business in a sense.
100%. Yeah, we've got the best partners in the world. Macy's, Kohl's, Amazon, places like that are just amazing. And the teams are so dedicated to the category and the business. So I'd say initially, like I mentioned earlier, we were really their entry point into data. What's happening? What can we expect? What are you seeing from a travel trend perspective? But on top of that, the digital penetration that they were seeing is so significant as well. So I'd say the relationships, if nothing else, have only strengthened. And it really just comes down to, again, 20 plus years and with many of these organizations of history and heritage, and then reinforcing to them that our commitment was, initially the challenge was people weren't traveling, but now the challenge is global supply chain. So partnering together to make sure we're lucky to have the infrastructure to make sure that we can get enough product in to support them. So it's been an amazing journey, and I think that in many ways we've only strengthened our position because we were there for them in those moments and they backed us up as well.
So I know we all want to stop talking about what happened during COVID.
Yes, please.
Talk a little bit about what's happening now, what's to come. Talked about how this is first in-person experience for a lot of us at a conference. What are you predicting? What are things that you're trying to capitalize on right now as things truly open up at a scale we hadn't seen as we were going through the up and down, locally throughout COVID.
Yeah, I'm super stoked. I think there's some really amazing trends on the horizon. So in the travel space, I'll give you like 2 or 3 things that I'm looking forward to. The first is revenge travel. So people who are now, a lot of people just literally came out and they're like, okay, I got to go make sure like grandma's okay. I haven't seen her in 2 years. So that's like kind of happening right now. But a lot of people are sitting here saying like, I don't know if what the future looks like. So if I want to go on that bucket list trip, 2 weeks, slow travel, maybe using trains instead of airplanes because of the impact of climate change and things like that, that's what we're really seeing. Longer trips, much more deeper trips, and really people are going to be attacking those trips that they, are their bucket list. So that's one. The second is on the sort of business travel side. I don't know if have you ever heard of Bleisure? Bleisure.
No, I haven't.
No, so Bleisure. All right, so Bleisure is basically business and pleasure. So what it used to be was I'd go on a business trip, like I'm doing this weekend, kind of, and I would stay. I'd extend my trip out, and I would kind of hang out in the city, and that was sort of what the business trend was. But now with like remote work, the experience is completely shifting. So people are like living their best lives, constantly traveling in a casual lifestyle way, but then working from wherever they are. It's almost like flip the whole thing on its head. So those are 2 trends that like I think are really interesting and exciting. And I know we're going to talk about it, but I think trend 3 outside of travel that I'm most excited about is Web 3 for sure. But I know we're going to hit that. I'm jumping ahead.
So in terms of how you engage with your consumer, right? Take the concept of Bleisure, right? How does that transform how you communicate with them? What are things that those insights have led to in terms of how you changed your approach?
Yeah. So, we are our consumer, and I think that's a lesson for all your brands. Like, you should be bringing in people that share the same purpose as your consumer. So, I consider myself what we call the conscious mover. So a conscious mover is someone who recognizes the importance travel plays in their lives, recognizes sort of the impact we have through travel, so sustainably traveling in a way that doesn't leaves the world in a great place for future travelers, and also conscious about like how I like to organize my stuff when I'm moving, So by living the lifestyle, it's easy for my team to build content and tell stories because this is literally just how they live their lives. So my point of view would be just live the lifestyle, build content based off of, authentically being your consumer, and you're probably going to get it right most of the time.
You talked a little bit about your team, right? And the way you came into the organization, you're probably trying to do a lot of learning, but really quickly you all had to change the way you were working, not just physically, but thinking about how you're reaching your consumer, reacting to all of these trends. How did you work with your team to navigate all this? And less of like this was our top line strategy, but from a person-to-person level, right? Are there any things that you maybe think that you did really well that helped your team to work stronger together to produce a better outcome, especially coming in as a new leader during that turbulent time? Yeah, absolutely.
Imagine you're starting a new role and literally never met anyone for like 3 or 4 months. It was pretty wild, going through that transformation of how to work remote and how to create relationships. Really challenging. I think that it made us stronger because, a lot of large organizations move pretty slow. They're fairly siloed, right? And like it's hard to move things around and to build sort of a quick and nimble infrastructure. And right away, one of the things that we did is we implemented a daily touch base. It sounds so simple, but we have a real cadence with our business. On Mondays, we do reporting, leadership meeting, what happened, what needs to happen. And then as we go into the, Tuesdays, full team. Full hour, where's the business? And then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are these really quick hit huddles where we're literally just like, what does everyone need from each other? How do we move quickly? Where do we need to optimize? And that's a big shift for some organizations to go through in terms of the expectations and the sort of how do you move that quickly, especially bringing that in from a digital penetration perspective. And then how do you implement that in slower moving channels historically and brick and mortar and things like that? So I'd say that has been the biggest shift, which is just leveraging data, building the relationships with the individuals, and then ultimately implementing like enough process to empower the teams to go, whether they're physically together or not.
So this is something I didn't prep you for, but you mentioned something earlier about sustainability, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of us think of Samsonite as quality. We're not getting a Samsonite bag and trashing it and then just flipping it over and getting a new one. So I think that's something that whether it was conscious or not, has strong ties to the brand. But as sustainability is just a ubiquitous expectation for consumers and how they view a company. What are specific things that you're doing either to capitalize on what you already have as part of your brand DNA, or to move into next evolution of sustainability for Samsonite?
Yeah, it's critical. It's critical. We literally have we call it our responsible journey. And our ambition is to be the most sustainable travel brand in the world. Like, that is our ambition, and we're on the right path. We actually have an amazing head of sustainability who's come in, and he's putting in a lot of infrastructure around how we measure and what our goals are going to be, and where we're going to focus in terms of things like climate action. We've got durable products, and making those products even more durable, so that life cycle management is really robust, is critically important. I mentioned the conscious mover as my sort of muse and the archetype that I'm passionate about, and those words are chosen purposefully because we recognize that the thing that we love to do has challenges as it relates to sustainability. So we want to be on the front lines as the market leader, and I think that building the right strategy is critical for everyone's organization. But I hope next time we meet, everyone in the room says, yeah, I saw Samsonite, and now I don't just think about them as durable and high quality and really cool lifestyle brand, but also that the DNA of sustainability really shines through in the next 12 to 24 months for us.
So talking again a little bit about the future, what's something that you did learn throughout COVID and insight that you're committed to carrying forward, that you think maybe you wouldn't have learned not having gone through all of these ups and downs in the wild ride that we all have experienced, especially in the travel vertical?
It's a great question. I think what I learned is you don't have to wipe your groceries off, despite what my wife. A lesson for COVID. I think that us as marketers have gone through so much transformation that, for me, the biggest lesson has kind of been you don't know what tomorrow's going to bring, to be quite honest. So what that has meant for me and the team has just sort of been about have a clear plan about who you're trying to win with in terms of your consumer and who you're committed to, and be true to them, know where they are, but expect the unexpected and remain nimble. I think that really has been the biggest thing. If you think about it, I've been saying to my team, it feels like we all have been going through a PhD course in business. Category shifting, channel mixes, completely crazy shifts, and then you've got supply chain challenges, changing the inflation. Like, think of all these things that we've gone through as marketers, and literally I don't think there's a puzzle that can be thrown at this group of individuals in this room, and I know my team, that you can't overcome if you've been able to overcome the adversity we faced over the past 2 years, for sure.
So jumping back to something you teased out a little earlier, we're at South by, obviously evergreen hotbed of innovation. What are things that you're excited about personally? What are the things that you're excited about learning more about here, or just even for your business that you're thinking about ways that you already want to apply them? I know you mentioned Web3.
Yeah, that's definitely the thing that's on my mind the most. I'm really passionate about Web3 and decentralized web. I'm sure everyone in this room's heard a little bit about it, but at the end of the day, this idea of decentralization and the power going back into the hands of the consumer, maybe shifting a bit away from these large organizations that are at the heart of Web 2, is definitely, it's not even coming, it's here. It's here now. And I think the infrastructure of blockchain, in terms of how it's going to change the dynamics of not only the consumer marketing side, but things like supply chain operations and organizational technology is super, super fascinating. And I would just advocate, and I'm happy to talk as much about it as you want, but I'd advocate for everyone here to get deep into it. Learn about the NFT space, learn about the utility associated with it, because the community piece of it, in terms of how communities are coming together and standing for these decentralized organizations and platforms, and then ultimately manifesting themselves back on these more expected platforms, places like Twitter, is super interesting, and I think it really is where community building and marketing is heading in the next, I want to say 5 years, but I think the next 2 years we're going to be deep, deep into it.
So going off topic, but on topic a little bit related to that, before I jump to virtual travel and metaverse, you just talked a lot about community, the decentralization, and the equity that brings. In other sessions, the things we went through during the pandemic, unrelated to travel, right, related to equality amongst a large number of different underrepresented, underprivileged groups, etc. How does Samsonite think about equity, creating that within communities, or even how would Web 3.0 help you to tackle some of those goals? Just want to hear a little bit more about that in terms of your specific approach or view for Samsonite.
Yeah, absolutely. We are 100% focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and basically we have a global task force associated with that. I'm actually part of the global task force, and we are building programs, community learnings within the organization, and really doing our part to make sure that we represent the world the way it looks. So very committed to those, to those goals and objectives. And from a community perspective, from a marketing side, I'm never one to, if we don't have permission to talk about something politically, then my recommendation is always like, if you can't authentically say you don't have something, then I prefer for brands to sort of like take a pass. So when we have something to say and can lean in, we've got some great Pride products as an example, and nonprofits we support in that space. But there are other things where maybe we're just not, in the place where we would be supporting it or not supporting it based off of the authenticity and how it affects the travel space overall.
Yeah, authenticity. I hear that. So something fun, we want to hear a little bit from you about what your interest is in the metaverse, potentially personally. I know we talked a little bit about the concept of virtual travel. Maybe any thoughts that you have on experiences Samsonite could bring to that space and that world, to help us all maybe when we can't get on a flight.
Yeah, I'm not going to announce any Web3 metaverse things out here today for Samsonite, but I will say, obviously, digital product creation, digital identity, it's already there. I was telling this story about someone who got a Nike drop, and they were so excited. They're like, I can't believe I got it. I always strike out. They brought it into their son, and they're like, yo, like, I got the drop. Check these out. How awesome are them? And the kid was like, I already have those. And he pointed at his screen, and his Fortnite character was wearing the sneakers. And he had no differentiation in his mind between the virtual and the physical good itself. And that's the world we're entering right now. And you could say, man, that's brutal and that's bad, but like, it just is where culture is going. And it's just a different representation of realities and connection and experiences. So I think we have to recognize that. And for me, I think that the metaverse in terms of digital identity and being able to experience things that you can't experience in the real world is super interesting. I think people are going to need to carry around their digital goods, and you could absolutely see a place for Samsonite in that universe, right? But then also the underpinning idea of whether it's non-fungible or fungible tokens and their value is amazingly powerful, because at the end of the day, it's about creating utility and value for the consumer, right? So if you're stay with Nike, because they're just an easy example. When that guy wants to resell his shoe, his physical shoe on the resale market, Nike is not in that transaction, right? And they lose line of sight to that consumer. They're gone. But if there was a digital token of that same shoe that held value associated with the footwear, when it was passed, not only through smart contracts could Nike get a piece of that transaction, but also now they can engage with that new consumer who's owning the product. So that's just one example of how utility can be created. So I'm thinking about that constantly, saying, man, when the cookie dies, and it's going to die, how am I going to create a CRM environment and engage with consumers and continue to drive value? And I think that that's why these NFT projects, which are like the next Star Wars, right, and like the next Disney, is literally probably sitting in this room, and I know it is because my boys from Lazy Lions are right there. If you guys want to learn about NFTs, talk to those two guys. But that's where IP, brand creation, utility, value creation is going to come from in the next 5 years, and it's just a really exciting time to be part of something new.
Well, thanks, Dave. I think I asked too many questions. I don't know if we have any time for questions, but maybe we'll. Okay.
Absolutely. Aside from learning, I'm wondering just like how do we get one of those surprise bag drops you talked about earlier? I'm assuming that's coming later.
We'll talk.
Yeah. Any questions from the audience?
All right, I'll lead in. I know you can't share what you're going to do necessarily from an NFT or a Web3 standpoint. But
Yeah.
by the way, you're spot on with everything that you're talking about. So you're very
Thanks,
well
man.
educated in this space. But
Thanks, man.
where do you see the future for Samsonite within that space? Obviously, there's a lot of options.
Yeah.
And consumers are spending more and more time there. It's very nascent now.
Yeah.
But do you see that as a place that Samsonite will eventually be and execute somewhere?
I think that any good brand is going to spend time there. And I would say that do so authentically.
Yep.
So don't make mistakes I've seen other brands make where you just buy a company, right? That's always a problem when you just kind of buy into a community. The best brands will participate.
Yep.
And they'll learn and they'll engage, right? And then from there you learn where you fit, and fitting could be, hey, if I bought a Bored Ape today, I have some IP rights to that and I could leverage it and unique and smart. He has a Bored Ape. Will you sell me a mutant? But you'll engage, you'll learn, and it could take you into a different place. I'm thinking supply chain, blockchain, being able to get more nimble and where's the product coming from, because we know that world is shifting too. So there's lots of places to take it. I think my biggest advice is play. Go in there and be authentic and learn for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.